as a quick reminder, this panel is called, well, that didn't work, Trolling the Manuscript Graveyard. The description is, you've written the thing. You feel good about the thing, but nobody else wants to read the thing. And damn, that hurts, doesn't it? Here's how to survive the manuscripts that didn't make it. So our panels will dust off those first books that they'd written that never got to see the full light of day, crack open the pages, and tell us how they picked up the pieces and kept putting the pen to paper in spite of it all. Because this writing is a business after all. It takes work to make it work. And if you're not getting told no, then you aren't trying anything new. I'm excited to have Zach Steele, Kelly Quindlen, and Man Martin here with me today to share their experience and their wisdom on this topic. So thank you all for being here. Let's have some fun. Let's talk. So first of all, let's talk about your first experience with a manuscript that just didn't quite work out. Let's jump to Kelly. Would you like to start off?
I can. It's funny, I told Zach and Marianne when we were first figuring out what the panels were going to be and who was going to sit on them, that I didn't know if I would be a good fit for this panel because I've never actually completely given up on a manuscript. And Zach said something like, we would like to hear about how you knew to keep going. So I guess that's more what I can speak to because it's all related, right? It's happened to me a lot, of course, that, I get far into a book and then something's not working and then I have to revise. That happened the most with my second novel, just The Problematic Middle Child, of course. It took me, excuse me, let's see, I started writing late to the party in the spring of 2014, queried an agent 3.5 years later, after I thought I finally knew what the book was. And then when we sold it, my editor and I did a huge revamp and it ended up completely different. And there were so many times I felt very frustrated with the story. The story changed a million times. But I think the thing that kept bringing me back to center was the characters, paying attention to the characters, coming back to who are these teenagers, what do they want, what's making them tick during the course of this story. And because I'm not really a plot driven writer, I'm more character driven. And so that's really what brings me back to center when I feel like I'm hitting my wall with a certain manuscript. Is sometimes you need to take a breath, you need to regroup, you need to go for a bunch of long walks, you need to clean your kitchen, and eventually time will do its thing and you will figure out where to go next.
It's really interesting. I want to ask you a follow-up question on that. You mentioned that the story changed a lot and that you kind of relied on those characters. Did you find that the fundamental identity of those characters was the same throughout or somewhat evolved, or did you have to change who they were materially?
They actually did change a lot. I knew that I had 5 core teenagers I was working with, and their names stayed the same the entire time, from April 2014 when I first started writing it through April 2020 when it was published. But their personalities did change, their dynamics did change. I eventually figured out, relationally, that it was different between them than I initially thought. And so I really just kept trying to dig into these characters and be open to portraying them a different way. So there was one character named Zachary who I initially thought was kind of this kind of like alpha male, had a bit of an edge to him. And then he did a total 180 and he ended up becoming this kind of very nerdy, inexperienced wallflower. And so, initially when you're kind of like, maybe I should go in that direction, that can be daunting and it's so easy to stay attached to what you've done already. But I think you need to follow your intuition and follow your curiosity and see where that leads. And then, eventually Ja'Cory, as I ended up writing him, it felt like he had been that way all along and that he was meant to be that way. So
Man, do you have an experience that you could share around, a manuscript that wasn't quite working out or that you had to abandon?
I definitely can. And I've had similar experiences to Kelly as well. Excuse me. My first novel I wrote actually as a student at Kennesaw State. And if you care to visit the stacks, you can find it. It's called Long Gone. It's unreadable. It's unreadable. I realize that. It's what I did for my MFA. There's a lot there that's good, and I think it's actually a good premise. But the problem was, by the time I had finished it, I think I'd actually grown beyond it as a writer. And the sorts of things I was doing in the novel, I was no longer interested in returning to. Um, but in as I look at my books, every one of them started out wildly different than the way it ended up. In my most recent book, The Lemon Jello Syndrome, the protagonist, who's very sympathetic, I thought he was going to be a villain, and not just a villain, kind of an ogre. So I gave him the name Bone King, which is really sort of ominous. But then it's like, oh no, this is a sympathetic person. But by that time, I was so welded to the name, I couldn't change it. My second book, this is incredible that I ever thought I was going to do this. I thought I was going to write a sort of about a grisly murder along the lines of the O.J. Simpson murder, and I just couldn't do it. And I ended up writing it about a hot dog stand. So help me, it really was the same germ, but just like Kelly said, you have to sort of look at the book and think what the book is trying to be, and not try to impose a necessary, this is how it's going to be, a priori stance on it.
Yeah.
you know what it makes me think of, man, the way you're talking is I'm not a parent, but I know a lot of parents will talk about their kids and how they expect their kid to have one personality or show interest in a certain thing, and then but kids are their own entity, and I think the best way to parent them is to honor who they are intrinsically, and I think approaching our novels that way is very helpful. You don't want to force them into something. You really do need to kind of loosen the reins and follow the book's lead. And I know that sounds very like woo woo, but there is an element of magic and intuition to what we do, and there is that alchemy that none of us totally understand, and we have to honor that.
I'll do you one better on woo woo. We'll just do woo woo woo. I agree with you. It is like children, and children, as a parent and now a grandfather, I now realize people come into the world with personalities. Your personality might be shaped, but it's not formed. It's like you've already got it from the womb. My mother had a notion she shared with me, which was when she was a little girl, she liked to imagine there was a library in heaven, and all the books that had ever been written or ever could be written existed in that library. And if you wanted to become an author, all you had to do was somehow gain access to the rooms of the books that hadn't been written yet, and just fetch one down from the shelf and just copy it. And that's a woo woo woo. But I think, you know, I think there's something actually fundamentally true about that. This book actually already exists. My process is simply to honestly and diligently discover it, what it is. And I have lots of preconceptions about what it'll be. Many will be wrong, maybe most of them.
Yeah, I think the thing about being a writer is whether or not you're dealing with a manuscript that didn't work, or like Kelly's talking about with ideas or components that didn't work, is something that you're going to face all the time. And I have personally written an entire book and realized that it didn't work, and for one reason or another, and had to completely revise it in an entirely different time with a different perspective, kind of thing. It's still fundamentally the same story, which worked fine, but the structure around it didn't work. And so you always have to be willing to adjust and adapt, and also let go of things that just didn't make it. It's funny talking about the woo woo stuff. and the idea of letting the story lead you and the characters guide you, which I totally agree with. People talk about writer's block and how they get to a place where they're stuck. And I believe that the reason people get stuck is because they're trying too hard to push the story and characters in a direction they don't want to go. And so it's not that they don't know what to say next, that the story is saying, I'm sorry, I'm not giving you anything. And you have to actually be able to back up. I do weird things like interview my characters, a stream of consciousness, and ask them questions and let them answer right away to help me get unstuck. But there are ways to do it. You just have to be willing to let go and recognize that you may have had the idea in your head, you may have all the characters in your head, but the story was never really yours to belong with. It's yours to tell.
Mm-hmm.
Along those lines, how do you find your way out of going down one direction that's not quite working? How do you know when it's time to make a change?
The second, I'll jump in. The second question is easier to answer.
Yeah.
Like you can read your work and say, this is falling flat here. The first question, if the other panelists have an answer, I'm all ears. There's something that in the novel Misery, Stephen King's character is an author, and there's something that happens that's very true to me. The author's, he's a captive. If you haven't read it, it's highly entertaining. He's being held prisoner by a mad woman who's making him write a sequel to a character who was killed. And he's trying to force it to happen because his life actually depends on it. And then suddenly he discovers something that he didn't know about his own characters. And at that point, his novel moves forward. I think what you hope to, and there's all sorts of tricks, you take a walk, you do something else, you just stare at the computer, but you're hoping for those discoveries. I don't have a specific recipe to coin them. Kelly, if you do, or Zach, I'd be happy to hear it.
I like Zach's, what was the tool you just said where you will
stream of consciousness interview?
That's really helpful.
I was stuck on a manuscript. It's one that it's not in the graveyard. It's sort of like sitting out on the street outside the cemetery. And I just haven't finished it, but I was stuck on this scene. It was something that was missing. And I had this character, her name was Agatha. And I was like, okay, I need to figure this out. So I just started asking her questions. And, obviously you need to have the voice of the character and have them in mind. And she started answering, and she threw this thing out about a type of character, a being that it wasn't in my notes. It wasn't anywhere in anything I had written. And she explained it to me. And I suddenly realized that was what was missing. And it was the most bizarre moment in my writing life. And I hope to be able to do something with that someday, but it became a tool after that. And I really do try to pester my characters with 1,000 whys and figure out exactly what it is that drives them and what's part of their story. So it's a little thing that I do.
Yeah. Sometimes also writing in a first person perspective from a character who's not the narrator works for me. Because of course I write YA, and so voice is very important, and having that main character who narrates is very important. And if I hit a wall, I might get out of that main character's head and then go write something in the voice of the love interest, which I maybe have never done before. And that can help unlock something. I also find that music can be a helpful unblocking tool. Sometimes, you're going for a walk, and if I just let my Spotify shuffle around and I kind of let myself see what comes to the surface. I try to not control the songs. I try to just let a song come up and see where my brain goes in terms of the book I'm thinking about and that song. And that has been helpful to me before. Like with my first one, Her Name in the Sky, I didn't know, I was trying to figure out the ultimate clash between a bunch of these teenagers, and my sister sent me a song that was almost very like aggressive and like warlike. And it made me think of one of the secondary characters. And I realized that something in his life fell apart. and which I had never anticipated. But once I unlocked that something in Luke's life fell apart, then it was, I could see how something in Hannah, the main character's life, what the ramifications were. So, they're all interconnected the same way the human body is interconnected. You think there's no relationship between, pressure points on your foot and neck pain, but turns out there is. And I think characters can be that way too.
And to finish that up before you move on, Dale, I mean, I'll echo what they said as far as like, when do you know that it's time to quit, or to rework it or to let it go, whatever it is. And I don't know the answer to that either, other than I just kind of feel it in the moment that it just, for me as both a reader and a writer, something isn't there. And either I need to disassociate myself for a while, either a walk or something, or I need to just move on to another project for a bit and then come back to it when I have fresher vision.
I think that's really good context. I think you read a lot of biographies, and people will claim that success doesn't teach them nearly as much as failure. What's your take on that? Has it been true for any of you guys in your writing?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we do with our characters, right? I mean, we basically drag them through failure and torment and everything for them to actually learn the lesson that they have to learn in the end of the story. Because I mean, I know for me, the worst moments of my life are actually, I mean, writing career anyway, are the ones that defined who I am now as a writer. And so I don't know, to me, there's so much parallel between writing it and living it that it feels kind of natural to fall on my face.
Mhm. I guess, I sometimes wish I could be a writer who could just dependably turn out work, good publishable work. Every 12 months, every 8 months, I could have a novel ready. I could certainly write that quickly. And I wonder, like, why is it still so hard? Like, why is it so hard? But the reason it's hard is because it's only interesting to me if it is hard. If it's only interesting if I'm going to try to do something that I haven't really done yet, even if parts of it are familiar to me. So I don't know if that's necessarily failure, though failure is part of it. But at least it's stretching yourself out and putting yourself on the line somewhere.
I don't think success teaches you anything, or at least if it does not teach you as much as failure does. I think things I've learned from having a few small successes are more about like my relationship to my own self-worth and things like that I need to work on. But as far as like lessons that I've learned from that, can't really think of any. I mean, it's boring to watch someone walk in the sun through a meadow, everything's fine and dandy. It's interesting, like Man is saying, to watch somebody have a dark night of the soul. And it's like Zach is saying, like all of our books are ultimately the hero's journey, and we are all on the hero's journey. And writers, I think, are just going to keep chasing the horizon because we want to get better. I don't think anybody writes a book and is like sated. I think most of us are driven to then do the next thing, or try this next one as a novel in verse or whatever it may be. We are motivated by that because it's hard, and the difficulty makes it purposeful for us. It gives us a reason to do it. If writing a book was easy, then probably everybody would do it. And a lot of people think they can do it. But we all know that it's really tough.
Yeah, and then forgive the sports analogy here, but it's a bit like Tom Brady. And Tom Brady, if you are not a Patriots fan and now a Buccaneers fan, Tom Brady is the villain. And Tom Brady is the villain because he just succeeds all the time. And we are programmed as humans inherently to both expect and be driven toward failure and struggle. And to see somebody not have that makes us really want to see them fail even more. So yeah, I mean, failure is a part of what we are.
And the inverse of that is true too. Like I think a lot of us we are wired to root for the underdog.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's
Because we
why,
want
like,
them to succeed. Yeah.
yeah, because that's interesting. And Tom Brady succeeding, or University of Alabama winning a national championship every year. It's boring,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but then we love it when there's a team like
Comes out of nowhere.
like when Texas A&M beat
Oh,
Alabama a couple weeks ago.
yes, exactly.
That was interesting, you know, like
Yeah.
would you rather read a story from the point of view of the Alabama quarterback going through that game or the A&M quarterback going through that?
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why there's movies made out of the underdogs, the heroes, the Rudy type things, where we see this person come, or this team come from out of nowhere and out of the dregs of failure and have that monumental success against the Goliath. So
Mhm.
it's fun. It's terrible to live, but it's fun.
It's,
So
it's wonderful though, you know, so in your metaphor, we are the Davids.
Hmm.
I swing between just sort of not depression, but gloom, deep gloom, like this barely makes sense. This is not coherent, and a kind of megalomania where this is the greatest thing ever written. People are just going to fall over in awe when I spring this on them. And it is, you wouldn't have those peaks if you didn't slough through the grim and ugly parts as well.
so this conversation is definitely going in the direction of mindset and psychology, which is wonderful. But we got a question from the audience that's a little bit more procedural, so I think that maybe this has some room here. Julie says, "I'm not hearing anyone talk about outlining ahead of time, rather letting it unfold. What do you think about the pre-process linking characters and psychological conflict?"
I will say, at least from the first half of that, that I can be very OCD about my outlining. And I mean that I want to see what the beginning and the end is, and I want to know what my character's journey should look like or what it feels like it should look like. So I outline excessively. And then after I do that, I tend to work off of it, but then let it go where it needs to go. So I'll address that part of it. But I think for me, everybody's different about outlining, but I believe in very much having some type of plan and structure going into it.
I am not a plotter. I am more of a pantser with some planning in there, but I I need to feel like I'm discovering what's happening, and so outlining doesn't work for me in that sense. I kind of will outline in my head like the next scene, and I kind of have a broad structure of the novel to know where I'm going, but I can't outline in detail like that. But that's just my process. A lot of people I know are outline fiends and they have to write them. I feel constricted by them, so I don't use outlines.
I'm the same way. I'm very much a pantser, and I set off like Kelly with a general thought of where I'm heading, but to record, I've never ended up there yet. I actually do outline those, strangely enough, once I've got a complete manuscript. And then I write a very detailed outline down to page numbers. You're saying the same thing, because I use outline more as a troubleshooting tool or sequencing. Let's see, do they already know about this? Has this occurred yet? And that gives me a global picture, but I can't do it in advance, because if I've got an outline, I probably don't need to, for my sake, I don't want to bother writing a novel. I've already got the outline. I know what happens.
There's some story about, and I don't know if this is true or not, or if it's just one of those, myths that we tell ourselves, but there's some story about a writer who was on a boat, like an ocean liner, and he had his manuscript in his suitcase. And then somehow the suitcase ends up, falling over the deck and into the ocean. and somebody says to, and the writer is distraught, and somebody says to him, well, it's okay, you know what, like you can just rewrite it because you've already done it before, you can just go back and retype it. And he said, no, I can't rewrite it, I already know what happens.
I like that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story.
Mm-hmm.
So, hindsight being 2020, you know, what would you say to your former self as they were going through some of those struggles, or would you just say good luck with it? Any advice
Um,
for folks who are stuck in the middle?
I'll tell you what my wife said to me when I get in a funk, because I get kind of nasty and a little passive aggressive. Like I'm not a pleasant person when I'm blocked. And she just says, remember this. Remember this. You've been through this before. Remember this. Make a note of it. And it helps a little bit. And just to know, yeah, this is going to happen. And it's, it'll pass or I'll die first, one of the two.
I would say the advice I would give to myself would probably have a lot to do with whether or not myself would listen, because at that particular age, I was a very strong-headed in terms of what I thought I knew. So I think I would try to be a little bit more on the, be nice to yourself and remember that this isn't a trip to the bathroom. You're actually taking a trip around the world. Take it a little bit at a time, enjoy it, learn, and you will get there eventually.
And there are times when it's appropriate to rest to go
Mm-hmm.
along with that.
Agreed.
Sometimes when I've spoken with friends in the past about hitting a wall in a novel, a friend will say to me, maybe you just need to step away for a week. And what's funny is I never end up making it a week. Like I'll tell myself like, okay, I'm just not going to touch it for a week. And after several days, something unlocks and I'm ready to
Mm-hmm.
go back to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes I literally rest. My wife calls it my old man nap, but
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of the day, it's like I'm just tired and my head is full of little bees. And if I can just lie down and close my eyes for 30 minutes, then I get up and not necessarily that something comes to me in a dream, although that can happen, but it's just like I have a fresh insight and fresh eyeballs for it.
I use naps a lot too as a tool. I do, like
Could
when
you
like
say
you're
that louder? My wife, say that really loud.
Mrs. Man, it's okay that he naps. No, I do it when my head gets too full of the bees too, or like if I'm hitting a wall, I will go lie down. And the funny thing is, a lot of times I don't even fall asleep, but just lying there with my eyes closed and letting all the thoughts go through me, it helps recenter. And you're right, it does make things fresher for you when you get back out of bed or off the couch.
I am terrible at napping, so I'm so jealous of the both of you.
That makes me so sad for you.
I can't. I lay there and my brain will not stop. And so it doesn't have to be writing related. I can't do it. It's terrible.
I'll raise a third hand for the power of naps. I generally get overwhelmed and overstimulated, and so going and taking a nap helps me like calm the neurons a little bit and reset, and then come back to something with a little bit more clarity and a little less fuss.
Mm-hmm.
So we got another good question here from Crystal around the idea of ritualizing your writing practice. Crystal says that it's refreshing to hear that you don't, not everyone always plans or outlines everything before writing because it's restricting. Most of the writing classes I've ever taken always teach you the guidelines of writing. Are there any particular items you must have when you write, such as specific pens, going to a certain place, type of music on? So I guess really this question is like, what's your writing ritual in your writing space, your writing time? What does that look like for each of you? If you have specificities you can share.
Well, I'll start. I'll say I do have very specific writing rituals. I get up pretty early in the morning and I tell myself I'm going to write, this many words. They don't have to be good words. And then I just show up and do it. I do really love drafting in longhand, and then retyping it. That just runs it through the mill a second time. I don't listen to music because music distracts me, even instrumental music. I'll find myself listening to the music instead of thinking about what I'm writing. And I write in a specific, I have an office I write in. This is actually not it. I find it's helpful just to say, okay, I'm here to do this. By golly, I'm going to sit and do it.
Yeah, as far as like specific things, I don't have a writing time, and a lot of that has to do with it depends on what's going on with broadly for freelance jobs or things like that. So I sort of it moves from day to day, the actual time I write. But before I write, whether I go outside or whether I'm just wandering in a circle inside, I do put on my headphones and open up Spotify and sort of purge everything with music. Music is a very huge factor in every story that I come up with, and it's something that helps balance out the noise that's in my head. And I find that after I've done that and been able to decompress and sit down, that the words flow much better.
Speaking on music, I have found that because I'm similar to you, man, it's very distracting to me. But I have found that if it's a song that I know well and I loop it over and over and over, that can actually help me get into a state of flow. So sometimes if I'm working on a scene and I will literally play the same song on repeat for 2 hours, and then I don't even notice because it's familiar. It's it's kind of mesmerizing, like kind of just helps me get into that state of flow. And other than that, I would say the other things I have to do, candles can help. I'm very much a cozy type of person. The Netflix fireplace is a big favorite of mine. If you've never tried like the Birchwood fireplace edition on Netflix, love that. And it's also a good time marker because it's like exactly an hour long. So, I'll get caught up in writing and then suddenly the fireplace goes off and I'm like, oh, I just did an hour. But my main thing is I have to feel a lot of privacy. Like I have trouble writing in public unless I know that nobody can see my screen. What are those things you can get, like the screen protectors? Those are really great. So if I want to go write in a coffee shop, I will put the screen protector over my screen because then I can see it looking straight on, but anyone who's coming up over my shoulder, or they can't see it. Like something about I don't know, don't ask me to explain science, but I have to feel like it's an intimate thing between me and the page. I don't want anybody to know what I'm doing. Like I can't write if I'm being watched.
Interesting that you bring that up, because there's one other thing that I do tend to do, because I can't play music while writing either, but white noise is great. And the reason that people go to coffee shops generally, other than the people who just want to be seen writing, is because there's an ambient white noise in a cafe that becomes background to you and you're able to focus. And so there's actually a track of white noise that is just cafe noise. And so, Kelly, if you don't want to go to a cafe, you can just listen to this and you'll be transported, and you'll have this white noise in the background that allows everything to kind of blend out. And I have written to that many times and done very well.
And then I can just sit on the couch with the Netflix fireplace and my candles, and I'll get the best of both worlds.
Exactly. There you go. See?
There you go. I think it's so funny, Kelly, that I'm a cartoonist as well. And not when I'm creating a cartoon, but when I'm drawing it, just inking it. I've already got it, an outline. And then when I scan it and colorize it, I listen to songs. And again, my wife teases me because I will listen to the same songs over and over and over again. I'm curious. I want to do a question for you guys. I find I can write in the mornings, but I can't write past mid-afternoon. And all I can do at that point is edit. Do you have the same experience? I think, again, my head is too cluttered at that point. You say, no, you can write anytime, Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super ritualistic about the time itself when I write. It's more like Zach, where, you know, we'll see what's going on that day and where can I fit it in. One thing that's really interesting to me though is I find myself writing on Friday nights sometimes. I think it feels like a weird sort of safety knowing that everybody else in the world is distracted with going out to a restaurant or going out to a show. I mean, during normal times, right? Um, and knowing that I can stay in and like order a pizza and write for fun. And because it's a Friday night, it kind of feels like a bonus. So it feels like less pressure if I don't achieve something. But that can be like really fun for me. And I think I do tend to write better at night than in the morning, but I am a
Hmm.
nocturnal person and have been since I was a baby. So yeah, I'm not really a morning girl over here. Do you guys ever lubricate your writing by drinking a little bit before?
It's
I mine
me.
is
No,
caffeine. Mine is caffeine. Yeah, I don't actually drink that much, so I can't really say that. But I have to be caffeinated. I know that.
I will confess again, it's more for editing than for writing. In the evening, if I'm going to do editing, but there's a real delicate sweet spot. A glass of wine is just about right.
Hmm.
And then I'm relaxed and I do feel like my intuition is a little more freed up. But any more than that, there's a fairly rapid downhill slope. Um,
There's an upper
do
limit for
you?
sure. Yeah, I
There's an
mean,
upper limit. There's an upper limit.
yeah, but sometimes at night, I think if I have a glass of wine or a beer, it does kind of take away some of those inhibitions. And then you're right, there's an
Mhm.
upper limit. Like I can't write when I'm drunk, but sometimes it,
Right.
it does help me give myself permission to play more when I'm trying to
Hmm.
work through a scene. So I think that's also why I enjoy writing at night is it feels less structured.
And partly, and this is not to demean the benefits of caffeine or alcohol for writing. Partly, it's frankly to me a prop. It makes me feel like
Mhm.
a writer. If I sit with a mug of Earl Grey tea with a little cream in it, it's like, oh, I'm really the real deal now. You know, I need to get myself a beret, but just putting yourself into that mode, like I'm doing this thing when I look good in a beret, uh, you do feel like, okay, I'm doing writing now. It's the same as being in my office and writing. This is where I'm going to do some work.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny how our brains trick us in little ways and we associate certain little rituals with doing something. So I think we Pavlov ourselves, right?
Yes.
So
Hmm.
Yes.
I gotta say, I definitely feel seen in this segment. My first writing job was at an open office, and I had a desk that was my back was to a pool table,
nope.
and I literally I within a month of having that spot, I had to go talk to the boss, and I was like, look, I can't sit here for a lot of reasons. A, I don't like knowing that people are hanging out, looking over my shoulder, and B, like I'm easily startled, and so like every time somebody breaks on the pool table, I lose like half an hour of productivity because it scares me out of my skin. I jump out of my chair and I want to go punch somebody in the face.
That
So
sounds like hell, Daniel. I don't know
it,
I
how
can't
you did
imagine.
that.
you know what? I don't know how I did it either. I think it was my first job, so I was like, I'm gonna make it work no matter what, you know. And I just like I just figured it out. But
Was your first job as Batman? Because that was really good.
um, yeah, yeah, it was. You know, by day I was just you know, a devil may care billionaire, and by night I was in a really tight latex suit. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
Batman or something else though. Don't ask me about my personal life. Um, all right, so we have some other questions from the audience, and actually this one lines up with one that I already had for you guys. Um, have you ever gone back into your your archives, your treasure troves, or your graveyard and found something salvageable in there, and or what's the oldest thing that you've retooled, aka how long did it lie around?
I just did this the other day, actually. I'm working on my fourth novel right now, and I went back into discarded writings from my first novel and found a little scene that didn't work in novel 1, but I think it may work in novel 4. And so I copied and pasted it over, and it's of course going to be revised a lot. But yeah, I try to save anything that I think could have some value, but just isn't working for the current story.
Yeah, I've certainly done my fair share of graveyard farming and pulling up bones and trinkets that I could use for other things. I have folders on my external hard drive of things from as far back as like the mid 90s of just essays and bits and pieces and pages that I may have written that were just trying to explore character and not actually for a story or anything. So I think I cringe at a lot of it, but I still find things that I can use.
Mhm. I've done the same, and actually, with my current project, I wasn't aware I was doing it, and then I happened to look at an older manuscript, and it's like, oh my goodness, I'm reusing, these same patterns as another time, but I wasn't doing it intentionally. But I think that all that stuff was just seated in my unconscious, and it was there waiting to be used if I needed it.
So going backwards slightly to the previous topic of atmosphere, do you find it difficult to read in your genre while you're writing?
Yes.
I do, yeah.
I'm, I like my genre is just general literary fiction. I don't find it hard to read in it, but actually, a lot of what I like to read is nonfiction, and I love to read popular science and popular psychology books because I just find them very interesting.
Yeah.
I do get impatient with fiction. I easily will stop a book if I find a reason to distrust the author at all. It's like, okay, I'm done. I don't want to read more of this.
Yeah, I just find if I'm reading from the same genre that I have this innate fear that the ideas of that story are going to begin to commingle with the story that I'm working on, or that the voice may blend or something. And I really prefer to read something that is completely removed from it, so that that part of my reading part of my brain is completely occupied with something else.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I write young adult, and I have a hard time reading other YA books when I'm actively working on something. I think some of it is also like the worrying about comparing yourself to, sort of like similar to what you're saying, Zach. Like, I worry that it could seep into my story, or that I will like self sabotage by comparing myself to a finished
Mhm.
product, and saying like, oh shit, I'm never going to be able to do this. It's almost like looking at somebody else's Instagram feed and comparing yourself to it, right? The
It's
highlights
you're
while you're sitting
manuscript
there in your
shaming yourself.
pajamas. Yeah. So a lot of times when I'm actively writing YA, I will read like adult literary fiction, mysteries, thrillers, things of that nature. And like you, man, I'm always reading some sort of nonfiction, usually listening to like psychology audiobooks, because that can inform my writing, but it doesn't necessarily have a relationship to the subject I'm working on.
I'll be the odd person out and confess that sometimes I have deliberately gone back to models of other writers and just to look to see how they did something. So I want to try a passage where a character just has a monologue. He's talking to another character, and I'm looking back at the Virgin Suicides,
Mm.
and because it's it seems to be a plural narrator who's talking, but somehow you feel like they say things like, here's a photograph, look at this photograph. And so you have the illusion that you're interacting with something as you're reading just a monologue. And just to say, now I know he did that. How did he do it? Hopefully I won't steal too much, but just enough to be effective.
So we have a piggyback question for Man. Man, can you talk about the specific writing materials? I'm guessing we're talking about pen and paper or whatever that you use for your first drafts.
Um, I I sometimes compose on the keyboard. What I've been doing lately is I write everything longhand. and then, even write it 2 or 3 times longhand, and then put it in the computer, and then, God willing, I'll find time to revise it. There is something, Kelly talked about this Pavlovian thing. There's something very pleasant and tactile about forming letters instead of just hitting keys. So, other than that, just basic word processing. I've learned from painful experience to use Google Docs. So unlike this character in Kathy's story, I don't lose an entire manuscript, or Kelly's story rather, I beg your pardon. So such as it is, those are my materials. Loose leaf paper or spiral bound notebooks and computers.
Going back to one of the earlier questions, I sometimes find that if I'm hitting a wall in a story, that it can be helpful to get away from the computer and go write longhand. And I know a lot of other writers have said that too. Something about that physical, I think, very like ancient ritual of putting pen to paper can unlock something.
Yeah,
Right,
I have hideous handwriting, and I do death grips on writing utensils and cramp like really quickly. So for me, it's a blessing to not have to do that all the time. I remember hearing Tom Robbins talk about the way he would write his novels, and he would write the entire thing longhand and like tediously from sentence to sentence to make sure that it was right. And he wouldn't actually even type it himself. He would have somebody type it for him to send it on. So he never wrote by any kind of keyboard. And I both envy that and am glad I don't do that.
One of the great things about computers is obvious is the way I write novels is I'll realize, 3/4 into the novel that I needed to plant something 1/4 of the way. And it's lovely to be able to move back and up and scroll back and up and even incorporate similar language. So there's sort of echoes of themes that run through it. And a computer facilitates that better than anything else I can imagine.
Yeah, I do like cut and paste.
So, kind of shifting gears slightly, and kind of coming toward the end of our time here, I have another thing to explore, and that is, dealing with setbacks that aren't part of the early stages. So, once you've got a manuscript and it's done, how do you deal with rejection, whether that's not getting it picked up by a publisher, or just what do you do to develop thicker skin and sort of as we say, protect your energy and deal with yourself, separating yourself versus the creative product that is a sellable asset?
Some people are just naturally able to take criticism and feedback and not be affected by it. I'm most certainly, and most people in this industry are not writers, but I always kind of viewed it like a callus, and that there's no real trick to it. But just like the more friction, the more push that there is on something on your skin, that after a while, over time, you're going to develop this callus, and you just don't feel the things you used to in that area. And it's kind of like that. This is we go back to the failure versus success, and much like life, really. This industry is filled with a lot of what we might deem to be failures because of all of the rejection that is involved in it. And I think you have to allow that experience to happen, and you have to be able to work through that rejection and stay focused on the end goal, the dream. And you just eventually build that callus up. At least this is the way it was for me, build up that callus to where you understand that it's part of it, and that if you can look past the hurt and hear the words, that you can learn from it.
Kelly talked about, the things she learned from success is this validation that I can write, that I'm good enough to get this in front of the public, that strangers will look at this and enjoy it. And there's that. And the other thing I think you discover is that, you know, when you publish your first novel, actually nothing changes. You really are the same person that you were. I thought that there would be this glow and confetti would fall down in random rooms and I'd be greeted with trumpet volunteers. It doesn't happen. And in a way, that knowledge is very reassuring because it means if I write a manuscript that doesn't sell, nothing changed either. I'm still the same writer. I'm still the same person. The only question for me with the manuscript is it something I'm still interested in? Can I look at it now and say, yeah, this represents the artist that I want to be right now? And if it is, I'll keep putting it out there. And if it's not, it's like, well, that was the younger me that did that. And he was doing a pretty good job by his own lights. So
I think the advent of self-publishing has also taken away some of the sting of not having one of the big houses, accept your manuscript. That always feels like something I can keep in my back pocket because I know that if I believe in a story enough, there is a way for me to get it out to the world. And I self-published my first one, and I learned more from doing that than when I published 2 books through Macmillan. I learned a lot of entrepreneurial skills through self-publishing, and it almost kind of gave me this protective armor because I know that going forward, if Macmillan or another house says, we don't want the next novel, I can kind of be like, okay, well, your vision doesn't understand this or doesn't align, or maybe it's not good. Maybe it is a shit book. I don't know. But we have other things in place to help us with that, like critique partners and, and the like. So I think especially in the case of writing for like diverse audiences or underserved audiences, like, I write LGBTQ young adult, and the industry has caught up to being really good with that. But there's always the option, like if they don't, I'm going to go do this myself anyway. I'm going to go self-publish it because I want this book to be out in the world. And I think that that's a kind of a confidence booster because ultimately, like we should not be doing this for the vanity, right? Like, yes, it feels good to say, I got a contract with one of the big 4, whatever. That's your ego talking. But really, I think ultimately the reason we do this is we love writing and we want to be storytellers and share these stories with other people. And so as long as you're giving other people, like you're giving readers a way to access them, that is ultimately the sacrament that we're all looking for.
Kelly, do you find that having self-published that first book, did that give you some traction when you went in to try and get published somewhere else?
No, they didn't give a shit, honestly. The publishing industry is very arrogant. I think we all know that. They are very myopic. And just like an example of that, I've heard stories from other writer friends. I've experienced this where they think because New York is so liberal that, a small town in Kansas is at the same level of progressiveness with LGBTQ kids, so there are people in New York who think we don't need coming out stories anymore because things are fine for kids now. And it's like, no, that's not the case. But anyway, I digress. Yeah, they didn't give a shit. I mean, I think it helped that I had a little bit of a following like on Twitter and stuff, but I think they looked down their noses at it. I mean, I don't want to make assumptions, but that's the vibe that I felt. And even after then publishing Late to the Party and She Drives Me Crazy, my agent and I went back to a publisher and we said, do you want to re-release the first one, Her Name in the Sky, which that is self-published and that has sold almost 30,000 copies organically through word of mouth marketing in the LGBTQ community. So we're not talking like, this isn't like a vanity project for me, right? Like this book has resonated. And they're like, no, we don't think we want to do that. So even still, like now that I've proven myself, they still aren't interested in that. And of course my ego took a hit. But I also think that some of that is just the politics of publishing. And at the end of the day, like, I try to stay focused on pushing myself in my craft and pushing myself to try new things and make the next book better than the last.
Any other thoughts from you guys? Zach, man, we're running out of time here, so
I'll just say
Final
amen
thoughts?
to what Kelly just said. Yeah,
amen.
that's great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for this lovely conversation. This has been extraordinarily valuable, and so thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you. That was
everybody.
great.
Thank you.